Welcome to Excel Basics number 2.
And in this video, we're going to learn how to count and add with the functions count, count our rows, sum, SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, and if. Now, in the business world, there's lots of different types of calculations. But what do we do most of the time? Add, count, and create percentages. In this video, we're going to learn how to count and add. Now, the topics are add and count a whole column using sum, count, counta, and rows. But the thing is, most of the time, we're not counting and adding the whole column. We want to add or count just some of the items in the column based on conditions and criteria. So we'll see how to add and count with a single condition using SUMIFS and COUNTIFS. We'll see how to create a report with a formula using the amazing dynamic spilled array functions, unique and sort, with SUMIFS. We'll talk about Excel's golden rule. Then when we get to 2 or more conditions for adding and counting, we'll talk about the AND logical test and the OR logical test. And then, of course, we'll add and count with 2 or more conditions using the functions SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, SUM, and IF. All right, let's go over to the sheet, count and sum. Now, here's our data set. We have date, sales rep, and sales. And we want to look at count, counta, and rows for counting all the items in a column. Now, when you use the count function, it only counts numbers. So you decide which function to use based on the data type, or at least most of the time. For numbers equals count. And notice there's lots of different count functions. Counta, we'll see next. Count blank, you can imagine what that does. It counts empty cells. And then we'll look at the amazing COUNTIFS. I see count, tab. Like the sum function and average, it allows you to put in multiple ranges. We only have one. So in value 1, I'm going to highlight. And notice there is an empty cell. It's not going to count that. And I'm going to leave the parentheses off, because when you have a function with a single argument like this, you don't have to put it in. When I Control Enter, sure enough, you can see it put it in. And we got a count of 17. Now, counta counts not empty cells. It's often used for words. So we'll try this. Equals COUNTA. And notice the screen tip counts the number of cells in the range that are not empty. So in value, I'm going to highlight sales rep. So we're using COUNTA because the data is text. Control Enter. Sure enough, I see the parentheses, and we get a count of 18. Now, if you want to count how many rows there are in a table, regardless of what type of data type or whether there are empty cells, we can use the rows function. Equals rows. It needs an array or range. Highlight. Any one of these columns or the whole table itself would give us the same answer. From 3 to 20, including 3, that's 18 rows. When I Control Enter, sure enough, we get 18. Now, counting numbers, not empty cells, and just the rows. Adding, well, we already know how to do this. Alt equals, it doesn't guess right. So we select the top cell, drag to create our range, D30 to D20. And when I hit Enter, 6,200. Now, we don't have to worry about data type with sum because it only adds numbers. Now, all of these examples here, we're working on the entire column. But most of the time out there in the working world, we're not adding or counting everything. We're adding or counting just some things based on conditions and criteria. So for example, in this column right here, I want to look through the column and find how many Chantels there are. That will give me a count of how many sales Chantel made. That's not Chantel. That's a false. False. True. So that's a count of 1. False. False. True. That would be 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I don't want to count manually. I want to use a formula. Equals COUNTIFS. By the way, there's a COUNTIF. We don't usually use the COUNTIF or the SUMIF because the S1 can do one condition or more conditions. And The screen tips are easier to understand. All right, I'm going to down arrow to the S tab. Now we have criteria range 1, comma, criteria 1. Now, when people are learning COUNTIFs and SUMIFS for the first time, they often get confused. What do I put into criteria 1? What do I put into criteria range 1? Well, here's the trick. This one says range, so that means all the items from the column, arranged from the worksheet, comma, criteria, that's the individual condition. So backspace, criteria range. We want to look through the whole sales rep column, comma. There's the condition, the single condition. And I'm not going to close parentheses when I Control Enter. Sure enough, I get the close parentheses, and I get a count of 6. If I come over and change the condition, hey, I need to count how many sales Sue had. 6. Now I want to change it back to Chantel, but Chantel, Control Enter. Why did I get 0? Because if I click back in the cell in F2, there are 7 letters and a space. A space counts as a character. So there's 8 characters, and it's trying to find those 8 characters. When I backspace, Control Enter, it has no problem. Now it's looking for exactly those 7 characters. It found 6 of them. So we know Chantel had 6 sales. Now, instead of counting, let's try adding. We want to add from this column all of Chantel's sales. So if we go through the column false, false, true, then we need this number. False, false, true, we need this number. Going down, we need this one. So there are 6 numbers from the sales column that we're picking out based on the fact that Chantel is in this column. So we come over, we type equals SUMIFS tab. For a single condition, we have to enter 3 arguments. For COUNTIF, we just entered this in the condition. But for SUMIFS, we're going to enter this column, the condition, but we have to enter the column that has the values to add. Now again, if you get confused about what to put into the arguments, just read the screen tips. Sum range. Well, I see the word sum, so I'm highlighting sales. Comma. Criteria range. I see the word range, so that means I need all the items from the column. So highlight, comma, and then I see criteria. I don't see the word range. I simply put in the condition or the criteria. Now I can close parentheses, Control Enter, 2,300. If I type Sue, sure enough, we get 1,800. Control Z, back to Chantel. Now, what about adding or counting sales for a particular day? Well, we can do that. Equals COUNTIFS. Criteria range, that's the full column with all the dates, comma, criteria. There's 10/23/25, tab. So we made 8 sales on October 23rd, 2025. Now we want to add all the sales for that day. SUMIFS. There it is. It reminds me. I see the word sum, so I'm highlighting all the numbers, comma, criteria range. That's the entire column of dates, comma, and the criteria, 10/23, close parentheses, and Control Enter, 2,200. If I double click and change the date to the 24th, looks like there are 10 sales totaling 4,000. Now next, I want to scroll down using either the scroll bar or the wheel on my mouse. And from this data set up here, we want to create a sales rep sales report. Now we want to do this with formulas. And if we're going to have SUMIFS to add for each sales rep, well, we need a unique list of sales reps. Well, in Microsoft 365 Excel, we have some amazing new dynamic spilled array functions, unique and sort. So let's try unique equals unique. I see it there, and tab. Now the array, that's just the column where we want to create a unique list from. I'm going to click and drag up. And then I'm going to use the keyboard to jump back to the active cell, Control backspace. Now there are two other arguments by column. That's if you want to create a unique list across the columns. And then exactly once, that is if you want to list only items listed a single time. We don't want either one of those, so we simply close parentheses. And when I Control Enter, there is a unique list created with a formula. Now I got to show you something amazing. Back in 2012, I wrote a whole book called Control-Shift-Enter. It's all about array formulas. And Chapter 19 was how to create unique list formulas. And you got to be kidding me. Look at that huge formula, back-to-back functions. And F2, what did Microsoft 365 give us? A simple unique function. No more complexities from the past. We have an amazing dynamic spilled array function, unique. Not only that, that same chapter describes formulas to sort, and they were equally complex. But now all we have to do is either in the front, after the equal sign in front of unique, or on the inside, put sort. And now it's going to sort and create a unique list. Now, you can put it on the outside, but when you put it on the inside, it tends to calculate much more quickly on big data sets. And watch this, Control Enter. Bam! Sorted unique list. Now we can use the sum function with an ifs on the end, sum range. I want to click and drag up. And I'm going to use the keyboard Control backspace to jump back to the active cell, type a comma, criteria range 1. We need the full column. Click and drag up. That's the full column of sales reps, Control backspace, comma. And in criteria 1, if I put a single item that tells SUMIFS to deliver a single sum for Chantel only. Control Enter. That's not what I want. F2. And guess what? This is a dynamic spilled array formula, and we know it only lives in the top cell. We could click and highlight to highlight that dynamic range, or right after F28, you can simply type the spilled range operator, pound. And just like that, our formula will always get whatever is spilling from the top cell. When I Control Enter, we have created a report with formulas for total sales for each sales rep. Now, F2, that's called a dynamic spilled array formula. So is this. Now, I want to show you what happens to a dynamic spilled array formula when you change some data. What if we add a new name? If I come up here and type Timmy, enter, just like that, it dynamically expands. So any dynamic spilled array formula can expand or contract. And it's because it lives in the top cell, it's just spilling different number of items. Over here, F2, because we're just pointing to the top cell and have that spilled range operator, it says, hey, get everything that spills from that cell, no matter if it stays the same, expands, or contracts. All right, on this sheet, we saw how to count and add. Count a row sum for a whole column. COUNTIFS and SUMIFS when you want just some of the items based on a condition or criteria. Now I want to go over to the sheet EGR. And what does EGR stand for? Excel's golden rule. And here it is. If a formula input can change, put it in a cell, label it, and refer to it in a formula with a cell reference. If the input is never going to change, then like 24 hours in a day, you can hard code it into the formula, meaning just type it right into the formula. Examples of inputs that can change, sales of $100. These rates for tax or a hurdle for counting or adding in COUNTIFS or SUMIFS greater than 500. Examples of formula inputs that will not change, well, 12 months in a year, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. Now, this golden rule is the original epiphany that Bricklin had when he thought up the spreadsheet. In fact, here's my current book, The Only App That Matters. And in Chapter 2, page 16, The chapter's only 2 pages long, and it's called Why the Spreadsheet Was Invented. And the guy, Bricklin and Frankston, created it. But Bricklin had the original idea, and his idea was he was tired when he had many inputs into a calculator. When one changed, he had to retype all of them in. But their invention, VisiCalc, means that you can put it in a cell, create your formula, and if any input changes, you just change it in the cell, and instantly the formula updates. All right, let's drag this out of the way. All right, let's have some fun with Excel following Excel's golden rule. It says, create an Excel solution that counts how many sales Chantel made. And then a second task, add sales for the day, 10/24/2025. All right, so in F6, I'm going to type sales rep tab, the criteria for the count, Chantel, and when I hit enter, now I get to create the label for the calculation, something like count sales tab. And we're going to use COUNTIFS, and I'm going to try to use all keyboards, not the mouse. Equal sign, COUNTIFS, tab. I see criteria range, and I'm going to arrow over, arrow up, and then use Control-Shift down arrow to highlight all the way down to right before the first empty cell. I see criteria range 1. I type a comma to get to the next argument. Criteria 1. Up arrow, Control-Enter. We get a count of 6. Let's type Sue, Control-Enter, 7. Now let's add some formatting. I'm going to highlight these 2 cells. You guys can format it how you like. I like the dark blue, white font, some borders, more all borders. Notice once I use a particular type of border, it becomes the icon for the button. So I just click. And then, of course, here I'm going to add some color to let me know that's a formula. I'm using that green. We will leave the conditions or criteria that we can change with no fill color. Now, we could consider number formatting right here, but this is a count, so we don't need it. Later, if we have sales or dates or time, we might consider using number formatting. Now, last video, we created lots of formulas, but every single one of those formulas delivered a number answer. But I want to show you how to create a text formula. Now, wouldn't it be great if this had the sales rep name, like number of sales by Sue, and anytime we change the condition here, the label updated. That's a great example of a text formula. Now, before we link whatever text we have to the cell, I got to show you how to enter text into a formula. F2, and temporarily I'm going to get rid of the space, and I'm going to type an equal sign. Now, that's not how you enter text. You have to put all text that goes into a formula in quotes. But I got to show you what happens if we hit enter. In fact, I'll tell you, we're going to get a name error. And the reason why is anytime you have text without quotes, Excel thinks it's a function, and there's no function called count sales. So Control-Enter. That's a name error. Anytime you see a name error, it means you typed some text there, but you didn't put it in double quotes. Or you misspelled the function name, F2. Now, before we join this, let me just show you how you put text into a formula. There's a quote, and then there's one at the end. Whatever text has to be in quotes. Now, when I Control-Enter, it has no problem. Now, alone, that would be a silly formula because we would just type it. But now, F2, we want to create a text formula that links to this cell. I'm going to highlight and type number, period, number of sales by, and I'm going to add a space. Let's just see if this works. Control-Enter. That works. F2. Now we need to join 2 things together in a formula, text and a cell. And the way you do that is with the ampersand, Shift 7. That's the join operator. Now when I click on cell G6 and Control-Enter, wow, it worked. F2, we use the ampersand to join things together. Now let's try it. Show and tell and enter. Wow. The number formula updated and the text formula updated. Now let's do part 2. And I'm going to highlight all of this and right click. And up on the mini toolbar, I'm going to click the Format Painter. And a couple cells below, I'm going to click. And there you go. We copied just the formatting and pasted just the formatting. In this cell, I'll type something like date for adding sales. And then 10/25/2025. I see it's a 4. And enter. And I don't want to create a text formula here. I'm just going to type total sales and tab equals SUMIFS. Now you get to decide whether to use your mouse or the arrow keys. I'm going to highlight sum range with my mouse, comma, criteria range. Over to date, comma, up arrow because it was close, close parentheses, control enter. Now in this case, we probably do want number formatting. I'm going to use the keyboard Control 1 to open up Format Cells. There's lots of great tabs, but here is the Number tab. I want number. You can see the preview, comma. I don't want any decimals. Click OK. And now let's change the date. 5. And sure enough, well, there is no 5. The formula is correct. Let's type 3, Control Enter, and there we go. It is working. We have followed Excel's golden rule, formula input with a label, and we created a formula with a label also, and bam, there is our solution. Now let's have more fun with Excel's golden rule. If the insurance expense for the year is $3,000 and the company records the same amount for each month, what is the monthly insurance expense? Well, let's right-click, Format Painter, click, and the label for this $3,000 yearly insurance expense tab, 3,000, enter. And watch this. This is a great trick. If I type Y, because yearly insurance expense is the only Y text above, it thinks I want to repeat it. Now I'm just going to double-click yearly, type monthly, and tab. And now we can create our formula. Equal sign, up arrow, division is /, and 12 months is never going to change. So I'm going to type it into the formula, Control Enter, and there's our monthly insurance expense, $250. Now, one thing I didn't do up here is I didn't show the unit. Now we can show units 2 ways. We can add number formatting. Currency has a floating $, which means it's always by the lead digit. Accounting has a fixed $sign on the outside edge of the cell. I'm going to select currency. Control Z. The other way to do it is use the label. Indicate whatever the unit is right in the label. Down here, Control 1. Number, I like those commas. And I'm going to leave the decimals because if we enter some amount later that has decimals, I don't want to hide them because this is money. Click OK. Same here, Control 1, number, comma. We're not going to need it unless the insurance expense is really big. And now if we come up and type 10,000, Control Enter, bam, Excel's golden rule makes calculations in Excel amazing. Now, not only are we able to change inputs, but when anybody looks at this model, even us in 1 week, we understand perfectly what's going on. Not only the formula input, but also a label for the formula. Now, we got to go over and talk about adding and counting when there are more than one condition. Let's go over to 2 conditions. Now, let's remind ourselves what a single condition logical test is. Your mom says to you, if you take out the garbage, you get dessert. The logical test there is, if take out garbage equals true, you get dessert. Now, your mom switches it up. If you take out the garbage and you clean the table, you get dessert. So as a logical test, if you take out the garbage equals true and clean the table equals true, you get dessert. Now an and logical test can be two or more logical tests, but they all have to come out true for the and logical test to deliver a true. Now, if you only have two logical tests, here are the only four possibilities. True, true, that means the and logical test equals true, and you get dessert. True, false, sorry, that's not both. You don't get dessert. False, true, nope, you don't get dessert. And of course, false, false, you do not get dessert. Now, that's an and logical test. I'm going to scroll down. And now your mom says something different. If you take out the garbage or you clean the table, you get dessert. Now, with a two logical test or logical test, there's only four possibilities, and only one of them means you don't get dessert. True, true, well, you get dessert. False, true, you still get dessert. If the true comes first and the false second, you get dessert. It's only when false, false, then you get no dessert. So an or logical test means however many logical tests there are, all you need is one or more. In this case, when we only have two tests, 2, 1, 1 all mean true, 0 means false. Now if we scroll back up, now here's a business example based on a small data set with just 4 records. Here's the question. Count sales on 10/23/2025 made by loan. This is definitely an and logical test. And here's how it works. We're going to deal with two different columns. The date field must contain 10/23/2025. So we're working on this column. And the sales rep field must contain loan. We're working on this field. Now, you can see we only have one where both conditions are met. True, true. So the count is 1. If we look at it this way, we get, well, that's true, false. There it is. True, false. It doesn't matter if you get one true because this is and. They all have to be true. Finally, we get false, true. There it is right there. But it doesn't matter. Only true, true. Or, in this case, it's a two logical test. If you have more tests and it's an and logical test, they all have to equal true. Now let's scroll down. Now we get to build some formulas based on this data set here. Now the good news is SUMIFS and COUNTIFS and other ifs functions like average ifs, MAXIFS, MINFS, they all do an and logical test by default. Now here's our example for this data set. Count sales on 10/23/25 made by loan. Again, we have to translate this English into a logical test. Date column has to equal that, and sales rep column has to equal that. Now, I put the conditions here, the labels. Let's do counting first. Equals COUNTIFS tab. Now, this is where criteria range 1 and later criteria range 2 come into play. All right, I'm going to highlight the date column. Criteria 1, comma. Now, I match up the correct condition or criteria 1 to this date column. So there's the date, comma. There's criteria range 2. We're talking about sales reps, so we highlight, comma, and criteria 2, loan. Close parentheses, and when I hit enter, 3. If I change this to Sue, well, of course, it's 0 because, I made a mistake. And watch out. Tests that I give at Highline College, I always include some unnecessary spaces somewhere, and you have to track them down. I'm going to get rid of it, backspace, and there we go. Sue had 3 too. How about Chantel? And enter. Only 2. Control Z, Z, Z. Now let's sum this date, that sales rep, equals sum with an ifs on the end. Remember, the screen tips are your best friend. I see the word sum, so I'm highlighting the number column, comma, criteria range 1. Well, it doesn't matter in which order you do an and logical test, or an or logical test for that matter. I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to do sales rep first. Because criteria range 1 is the sales rep column, comma, I'm going to make sure and get the sales rep condition or criteria, comma, range 2, comma, and the date. Now, the only difference is we had to include a column inside of SUMIFS so that all the trues and falses, in our case, only when there are 2 trues, then it jumps over to the number column, grabs the number, and adds. Close parentheses, and it looks like 1,000. Change it to Sue, 700. Now, F2, notice we just used conditions. This is actually an equals logical test. There are a bunch of comparative operators besides the equal sign. We can say not. Yeah, see, we don't have a symbol for not, so they made it up. Less than, greater than together. Greater than, so we could count how many numbers are greater than 500. Greater than or equal to. And unlike math, there isn't a single symbol for greater than or equal to. So you have to, one after the other, add the character greater than and then an equal sign. And then less than and less than or equal. Let's scroll down. Now here's the example. Count sales from this data set here on 10/24/2025, where the sales are greater than or equal to 500. Now I've added a label in the condition label, and here's how you enter a number with some comparative operator. Greater than, equal, 2 separate characters back to back, and then 500. When I hit enter, notice the alignment is to the left. Excel thinks it's text, but COUNTIFS and SUMIFS works with that perfectly. COUNTIFS, criteria range 1. Doesn't matter if we do date or sales first. I'm doing sales, comma, criteria 1. There it is, comma. Criteria range 2. That's the date column, comma, and there's the date. Close parentheses and enter. 5 records where on this date the sales were greater than or equal to 500. If we come over and look, sure enough, there are 5. And those 500s are included because we have an equal sign. All right, let's sum, equal SUMIFS. And there's that lovely screen tip reminding us that the first argument must include the column with the numbers, comma, criteria range. Doesn't matter date or sales. The order doesn't matter, comma. There's greater than or equal to 500 in criteria 1, comma. Criteria range 2, date column. Criteria 2, there it is, close parentheses, control, enter. 3,000 bucks. If I change this to the third, only one sale greater than 500 on that day, and it's equal to 500. Control Z. Let's change the logical test. Less than 500. So 500 is not included. Control Enter. There are 4. And sure enough, in the data set, there's the dates. There's the numbers, all less than 500. Notice this one is not included. Control Z. Now, let's scroll down and talk about an OR logical test. Now, whereas with an AND logical test, you need a true for every test, for an OR logical test, however many tests you have, all you need is one true. One or more tests need to come out true in order to count or add the item. If we have 2 tests, well, you can get true, true. That's 2 trues. False, true. That's a single true. True, false. That's a single true. All of these result in a true for the OR logical test. The only time that you get a false is when all the tests come out false. So false, false, well, there's 0 trues. Now let's scroll down. And here's the bad news before I give you the good news. SUMIFS and COUNTIFS and the other ifs functions, they do not do an OR logical test by default. However many pairs of ranges and criteria you put in, it's always going to be run in an AND logical test. Now, luckily, there are a few good ways to do OR logical tests when we're adding and counting. but it depends on whether the OR logical test is working across a single column or two columns. In this example, we'll see how to run the OR logical test on a single column. Next example, we'll see how to do it over two columns. Now here's our example. We need to count and add sales for each sales team. We have team 1, team 2. And the conditions are both working on a single column. Now when we run this logical test, we have to ask two questions, meaning the OR logical test for each sales rep. So we ask the question, is Lung equal to Lung? True. Is Lung equal to Sue? False. And here's the thing. When you're running an OR logical test on a single column, you're never going to get two trues. In fact, you're only going to get one true or two falses. And that means we can use COUNTIFS and SUMIFS with a little trick. Now let's try COUNTIFS. Criteria range, we only have one column, comma, and instead of putting a single item into criteria 1, I'm putting both. That way COUNTIFS will deliver a count for both. Close parentheses. But of course, when I Control Enter, the results spill. But our goal is to get the total for the team, so F2. All we have to do is add, so I'm using the sum function. At the end, close parentheses, Control Enter, and bam! That's the total count for sales team 1. Now I'm lazy. I don't want to have to recreate this formula, so F2. When I copy the formula to the side, I definitely want this range to move to the next sales team, but this I need locked. So click Inside, click on Criteria 1 Argument, and hit the F4 key. And there it is, Control Enter. Copy it to the side, and anytime you copy a formula, F2. We're checking to see if the absolute and relative references are working. This one's locked, this one moved. That's perfect. Enter. Now we can try SUMIFS. We need the sum range, and I'm going to copy this to the side. So F4, comma, criteria range, the whole column, F4, comma, and in criteria 1, instead of just 1, I'm giving it 2, and they're going to be relative cell references. Close parentheses. Of course, Control Enter. This spills. That's the sales total for Lung. This is the total for Sue. Now all we have to do is F2. We're going to nest SUMIFS inside of sum, just like we did up here with COUNTIFS. It's going to add, close parentheses, Control Enter, copy it to the side, F2. And there's the formula for an OR logical test on a single column when we want to add. That's how to count. All right, now we're going to scroll down and see how to do an OR logical test over two columns. All right, to see how to do an OR logical test across two columns, this is our data set, customers, last year sales and credit rating, and here's the business problem we need to solve. Our company only extends credit to customers who have last year sales greater than $1 million or a credit rating greater than or equal to 4. So as we look through the customer list here, SW, well, the sales are greater than $1 million, and the credit rating is also greater than or equal to 4. Well, we get two trues. For an OR logical test, we only need one true, so SW gets credit. For PCC, well, that's not greater than $1 million. This is not greater than or equal to 4, so PCC does not get extended credit. QFC, well, not greater than $1 million. 4 is definitely greater than or equal to 4, so we get a false true. QFC, according to this OR logical test, gets credit. And here's the thing. We cannot use SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, or any of the other ifs functions to do an OR logical test across two columns. We're going to have to build our own array logical test and then use the sum and if function to get our answer. Now remember, internally inside of SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, They do all of the logical calculating for us. But in this formula, we're going to have to create the logical tests ourselves. Now, let's come over to B15. And the first part of this OR logical test works on this column. So I'm going to ask the question, equal sign, how many of you in that column, and now I have to use the comparative operator greater than, how many of you are greater than 1 million? Now notice, that's an operator. And on one side of the operator, we have more than one item. So of course, when I Control Enter, the results spill. And sure enough, we get the true and false pattern, which is perfect for this column. Now let's try the second column. Equals, highlight the entire column. We need our operator greater than or equal to. And notice that's two characters back to back, greater than or equal to 4. And when I Control Enter, there's our patterns of trues and falses. Now, we have two columns, and we actually need a single column of trues and falses to pick out the right records. And when you do an OR logical test, the way you do that is you add. So let's see how to do this. We're going to highlight the entire column and plus the second column. And just as we saw earlier, remember 2 trues, 0 trues, 1 true, and so on. So when I Control Enter, that's exactly what we get. And in fact, F2, anytime you use a math operator on true or false values, true converts to 1 and false converts to 0. So here it's really 1 plus 1 is 2. Right here it's 0 plus 1 is 1. And the last convenient fact about how things work in Excel is any non-zero number is interpreted as a true value in Excel. 0 is the only value that's considered false. So we have true, false, true, true, false, true. Now, in our formula over here, we're going to have to use that formula element, this one, and use a plus between the two. So let's come over to Count Customers equals, we're going to highlight the entire column and ask the question, are you greater than $1 million? Now I'm going to let this spill so we can see that each part as we build it is working. Sure enough, that's the correct pattern of trues and falses for the first part of the OR logical test. Now we have to F2, and we need to add, and then build the second column array logical test. But guess what? We have to force the comparative operator to calculate before the plus. So we put this in parentheses. So now that'll calculate all the trues and falses. Then we say plus, open parentheses, the second column, are you greater than or equal to 4? Close parentheses. And when I hit Enter, the result is exactly what we want, a column of trues and falses. Now, we cannot just add these because then we'd be double counting when we have 2 trues. F2, the way we're going to convert them to ones in essence is we're going to use the if function. if, open parentheses. It needs a logical test. Well, that's the logical test we already built. And since everywhere in Excel, Excel interprets 0 as false and any non-zero number as true, that's a perfect logical test. Now for the if function, we run a logical test. And in the second argument, comma, we say what value we want if the logical test comes out true. We want 1. And then we type a comma. Value if false, what do we want? 0. Now watch this. Using the if function and that array logical calculation, close parentheses, Control Enter. Now we can add these to get the correct count of 4. F2, SUM, open parentheses, close parentheses, Control Enter. and we get the correct count of 4. That formula right there is how we count when we're doing an OR logical test across 2 columns. Now, if we want to add, check this out. I'm going to copy this by clicking number and Control-C, Enter. Equal sign, Control-V, and I'm going to respell. Right now we have 1s, but we really want to pick out true, 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 true. 1, 2, 3, 4 sales value, so we F2. And instead of 1 in value if true, we simply highlight the whole column. And now when I Control-Enter, we spill the sales we need. The sales we don't want, we have a 0. F2. Sum, open parentheses, close at the end, Control-Enter, and that is amazing. If we change this to 2,000,002, now we get a count of 5, and there's the total sales. Control-Z. All right, on this sheet, 2 conditions. We saw how to do an OR logical test across 2 columns, count and sum. We saw how to use a single column when we have an OR logical test and count and sum. And we started it off by an AND logical test where SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, and the other ifs function do an AND logical test by default. Now we have 2 other examples in this video. I want to next go over to the sheet assembly. Now this business example comes from an assembly line situation where there are exactly 12 posts. And we have a data set, post 1 to 12, post 1 to 12. We've been collecting times for how long it takes to assemble a particular part. And the goal is to count how many times a post fell below the required 10 seconds assembly time. Now, here's one of the conditions, and we want to build a report in essence. We want to list the number 1 to 12. Now, we could use unique and sort to extract a unique list. But in this case, there really are only 12, and it's not going to change. So I'm going to use the sequence function. Now, sequence can do a lot of things. You can tell it for our situation 12, and it automatically lists 1 to 12. Now, we put 12 in rows, so 1 to 12 will be listed vertically. You could put a number in columns to list some numbers horizontally. You could put both to get a rectangle range where the last number is rows times columns. You could say what number to start at. By default, it starts at 1, which is what we're going to use. And you can indicate the step. That's the distance between each number. The default is 1, and we're going to use that. For us, that's all we need. Close parentheses. I didn't need that close parentheses. And tab. 1 to 12. Now we use COUNTIFS, tab, criteria range 1. We're going to look at the post, Control-Shift-Down arrow, Control backspace, comma, left arrow, pound. That means COUNTIFS is going to deliver 12 answers, comma, criteria range, click in the top, Control-Shift-Down arrow, Control backspace, and comma. Here, we're not going to put multiple items. We want to use the same condition to compare against each value, less than 10. Close parentheses, and when we Control-Enter, there's our report. And looking at our report, it looks like post 7 only fell below the required 10 seconds 17 times, but post 8 right next to them, they were stellar. 48 times they beat that 10-second hurdle. Now for our last example, we want to go to the sheet assembly 2. We have exactly the same data set, posts and seconds. But guess what? We're going to see how to use not COUNTIFS and SUMIFS, but some of the other ifs functions. MINFS, MAXIFS. We want for each post the fastest time and the slowest time. Equals sequence, tab, 12 tab. Equals min ifs, tab. Notice it doesn't say sum range. It says min range. This is still where we put the numbers, click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace, comma, criteria range 1, post column, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace, comma, left, hashtag or pound, Control Enter. Actually, I should have hit Tab. And there are the fastest times. And it looks like post 5, 7.3 seconds equals MAXIFS, max range. It's like sum range, min range. It still needs to be numbers. Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace, comma, criteria range, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace, comma, left, left, pound. And then when I Control Enter, there's the max time. It looks like post 11, 11.75 seconds. All right, in this video, we talked a lot about adding and counting, even a little bit about min and max. But in all cases, we are either working on the whole column or just some of the items in the column based on conditions and criteria. We saw an assembly line example with MINFS and MAXIFS. We did a 2-condition and logical test using COUNTIFS. We talked all about 2 conditions, the AND logical test and the OR logical test. We reminded ourselves about Excel's golden rule, and we started it off by talking about whole column counting and summing, count, counta, row, sum. And then we talked about COUNTIFS and SUMIFS with a single condition. And be sure to check out the practice problems at the end of the workbook. All right, this was a lot of fun with Excel Basics number 2. We'll see you next video for Excel Basics number 3.